Okay, so I'm just going to begin and say welcome everyone to today's workshop on the caregiver's journey. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So on behalf of the GSNV, I acknowledge the traditional land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples upon which we are located today. I recognise their continuing connection to lands, waters and communities, and pay my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past and present. Thank you. I start with introducing the GSNV team. Monica Ferry is GSNV's CEO, who can't be here today due to an international engagement. Holly Feller is Project Officer running our Genomics in Schools program, who also sends her apologies due to prior commitments. Myself, I'm Danielle Noel, Communications and Volunteer Coordinator. And we have today Malavika Vasanth, Project and Policy Coordinator, working on our diversity and inclusion strategy. And the newest member of our team, Susie Roxo-Farkas, Project Officer engaging with the Lineage Study Project. Today's program, The Caregiver's Journey, is presented by Nadiah Hanim Abdul Latif. Nadiah is a strategic advocate with over 20 years of experience spanning corporate, NGO and humanitarian work. Her passion for sustainability, business and human rights, as well as disability advocacy and access, is demonstrated through her work as a speaker, trainer, moderator, facilitator and youth mentor. Nadiah firmly believes that an inclusive and healthy society is only possible when everyone is equally committed, invested and involved. Nadiah, welcome. We look forward to the program today.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me. For the interest of conserving data, I am on 2 devices because I have a very high risk of having exactly what Helen just said. It will most probably hang. So I'm on my phone as well as on my laptop. If you're trying to figure out why I'm not actually looking at the camera, I will do my best to have a look. But at the same time, I believe Danielle will be assisting in the event the slides hang or there's something that's not going to be able to be playing, because I think the main purpose of this morning is to have a relaxed discussion about something that's super important to all of us, that does not get conversed enough. But at the same time, I'm also mindful that some of you have actually gone through a very intense 2-day, or was it 3-day session on grief. And so we don't want to add to your grief and hopefully have an open and relaxed discussion about what are some of the challenges that caregivers face, what are some of the things that we can do together. And really, it's not meant to be a lecture for me, but a facilitated discussion on both sides so that we might be able to hack some tips and tricks that you might already be doing in your homes or in your organizations that we can learn from. So I'm sure that, you know, out of this, I would be coming out of it learning from all of you too. So thank you for that. Maybe by way of introduction, let me just share my screen for a while. By way of introduction, my name is Nadiah. I am the president of the Malaysian Rare Disorders Society, as well as the Southeast Asia, India, Oman, Qatar, and South Korea representative for the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation, both of which are organizations of rare disease. But this is, of course, by no means my day job. It is my passion and everyday part of life. I think as with most caregivers, we all have different things that we do to keep the bills running. However, being a caregiver tends to be front and center of everything that you do. So I'm a proud caregiver of my daughter, whose name is Iman. She lives with Phelan-McDermid syndrome. And the 22nd of October every year is Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Day. So this session, I suppose, really is in honor of her, who's just had her International PMS Day. So very quickly, I just wanted to find out how many of us here are actually parents or caregivers or siblings, so we can get, you know, a little bit of a sense of who's in the room. Susie, yes.
Helen here. Is that okay?
Helen, go ahead. Yes,
yep.
Please do.
Yep, sorry. I missed the name of your daughter's diagnosis. Sorry, what was it?
Phelan-McDermid syndrome. So it's
Okay.
PMS for
Haven't-
short, but not
yeah.
the PMS that we're used to.
Yep. Yep. So my name's Helen, and I'm a mother to Ben, who's about to turn 30 on Sunday. He wasn't meant to live past 3 days old. So, you know, we've got some very interesting comments out throughout all his years. And he has Rubenstein-Taybi syndrome, RTS, and autism, as well as becoming a paraplegic at 16 due to an unexplained post-operative medical error. And I also work in the field. So I'm a volunteer peer support leader with SWAN. I used to be their information coordinator, but the funding reduced, so I'm just a volunteer now. And I also work for a statewide advocacy service. I facilitate workshops for training for families and professionals around anything and everything disability, NDIS education, you name it, we do it. And I'm also a carer ambassador for Carers Australia, and also a carer advisor for Carers Victoria, and that's all a voluntary role. That's me in a nutshell. So I work professionally, and I'm definitely a mum and a carer.
And you know what I find? Most of us who are carers end up having multiple roles that sometimes actually do have something to do with the lived experience that we have. Unfortunately, you know, doctors might learn about the conditions of our loved ones, maybe in a chapter or in a page or two, but we have over, in your case, 30 years of experience, 20 years of experience, 10 years of experience of whatever it is, the specific condition that our loved ones go through. And I believe we should never discount that, because in Malaysia, sometimes we have caregivers saying, oh, I'm just a mom or just a dad. And we always remind them that you're never just, there's so much more than that. So thank you, Helen, for sharing. Susie, you were going to say something.
Hi, my name is Susie. I work with GSNV. I am a carer for my 18-month-old, almost 19-month-old son who has acquired cerebral palsy. Thankfully, it's very mild, but it still requires ongoing care and a lot of appointments. And I also have a rare condition myself as well, so that's another burden on top of everything else. And thank you for presenting today.
Welcome. Would it be possible to share what your RD is?
Yeah, narcolepsy.
Okay. All right. And Danielle, would you like to share?
I'm not a carer, but I'm an individual that lives with a rare disease, vasculitis GPA, which inflames and necrotizes my medium-sized blood vessels. So that's led to internal bleeding, such as my lungs. There's also other organs involved. And I'm here to learn as a GSNV employer to understand how I can support caregivers. But I've also seen my husband at the time go through a significant care role for me that spanned you know, about 7 years as we managed my symptoms and the myriad of appointments and rehabilitation that was required to get me to where I am today. So thank you for today. I really hope to learn the different perspectives that exist in caregiving. Yes.
All right, thanks for that. And let me see, who else do we have here? We have Malavika. Would you like to share?
I'm not directly involved in a carer's role like the rest of you, but I do work with GSNV, and we do have a lot of connections with support groups. So I'm hoping to learn everything that you can offer today so that I can support them in, you know, whatever they do and make their life maybe a little bit easier.
Wonderful. Okay, so maybe let's share a little bit, since this morning's group is a cute, small, tight group. You're going to be helping me to present this to everyone else that will be watching this online. So I'm going to switch gear. When we actually do this in person, or when we actually do this, you know, in a group of participating people real time, there will be activities that we'll be doing. I love doing things more in person now that we're coming out of the pandemic. But now that we are actually kind of recording it, all of you are going to be the trainers with me, so that helps us deliver the session to whoever it is that watches this later on. Okay, so before we start, I usually like to kind of set the tone. And really, the expectation today is not so much in me sharing with you the science of caregiving or the things that you 100% already know. But the aim is really to have a really frank and honest discussion about day-to-day challenges that sometimes we don't talk about, or the cultural context of some of the things that we go through. And I love the fact that we've got a very diverse group today. And you might be in Malaysia, you might be in Australia or different parts of Australia. There are challenges that might be different from one place to another. And hopefully whoever it is that watches this after would be able to get a nugget or two of saying something that, oh, wow, whatever Daniel said resonates with what I'm going through, because that's pretty much what I'm seeing where I am right now, wherever that might be. And with your permission, I would also like to share this recording with the families in Malaysia as well. So whenever you share your stories, bear in mind that there will be at least a few hundred other Malaysian families that will be benefiting from your stories that you'll be sharing. All right, so with that, let's all warm up. So I've got a whole flask. So let's take out our coffee cups and coffee mugs or tea or whatever your poison will be in the morning. I wanted to share with you a favorite. He's actually a dance acrobat artist and also Goda. So bit of a background. Brandon Kazan-Maddox is actually a dance acrobat, singer, sign language artist, and he's a Goda, which means grandchild of person who is deaf. And he has spoken very publicly about what it means to be a Goda, to live with sign language as very much part of your first language, the culture of the deaf community, and he's also an amazing artist. So I felt that it would be nice for us to start the day with watching something nice, as well as something that has a message that talks about the fact that, yes, we might be from families that might have difficult challenges, however, that there's always hope. If you look at the way he presents the song, he's singing with his hands. So maybe, Danielle, shall we just click, and then everybody just spend the next 5 minutes just watching and chilling first. Yeah, so for that, correct.
Thank you for your patience with me.
All good.
When I look into your eyes, it's like watching the night sky or a beautiful sunrise. Well, there's so much they hold, and just like them old stars, I see that you've come so far to be right where you are. How old is your soul? Well, I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough. I'm giving you all my love. I'm still looking up, and when you're needing your space to do some navigating, I'll be here patiently waiting to see what you find. 'Cause even the stars, they burn, some even fall to the earth. We got a lot to learn. God knows we're worth it. No, I won't give up. I don't want to be someone who walks away so easily. I'm here to stay and make the difference that I can make. Our differences, they do a lot to teach us how to use the tools and gifts we got here. We got a lot at stake. And in the end, you're still my friend. At least we did intend for us to work. We didn't break, we didn't burn. We had to learn how to bend without the world caving in. I had to learn what I got and what I'm not, and who I am. I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough. I'm giving you all my love. I'm still looking up. I'm still looking up. Well, I won't give up on us. God knows I'm tough. He knows we got a lot to learn. God knows we're worth it. I won't give up on us, even if the skies get rough. I'm giving you all my love. I'm still looking up.
Oh, no. You have to drink it, mate. Drink up. Drink up.
So, as you can see, I think he sums up the.
Drink up.
Sorry? Oh, there's somebody.
Sorry, just Helen's microphone is still on.
All right. So, as you can see, I think the song sums up the journey quite well. I mean, the fact that despite the fact that things get really rough, despite the fact that very often things don't go our way, we might have plans, but we have to adapt. I think the core message that he shares and what I find is beautiful is the fact that in our caregiving journey, we find a lot about ourselves. We learn a lot about ourselves, what we can do, what we can't do. Every caregiver that I have spoken to have also spoken about the immense amount of love that they have found, which they never thought was possible, despite the challenges that they go through daily. Do we want to mute Helen for a while?
Helen, just letting you know your mic is on, and it's
That's
just
okay. I've muted. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's go to the next slide. So today we're going to be talking about our journey as caregivers. You want to click next? Yeah. Right. Okay. So while there was a big discussion about grief in the last few days, today I think the plan is to just talk about some of the challenges that we face, and they're multi-pronged. These challenges can be very cultural based. Some of these challenges are very special to the families that you belong to. So I wouldn't say that everybody's challenge is the same. If we have one person or several families with the same rare disease conditions, you would still have similar but not the same challenges, because there are many different things that happen in a person's family. And what we always tell the families also in Malaysia is that yes, while we are alone sometimes, or we feel alone in this journey, there is a whole community of people who will understand and resonate with what you're going through, because even if they don't go through the 100% the same of what you're going through, they understand the context of what it means to be caregiving for a person with complex medical needs, or being a caregiver and a person with rare disease, which we also have. And thanks for sharing that, Susie. We'll touch upon that. And what it means to be an individual with rare disease and also caregiving. So there are different dimensions here, and I love the fact that in this group alone, we've got 3 different types, or at least 3 or 4 different types of caregivers. One of the myths that I want to bust right spot on right in the beginning of our session is that a lot of people assume that caregiving happens between a parent and child, or between a child and an elderly parent, whereas caregiving can happen in so many different ways. Some of us are employed to caregive. Most of us caregive because they are our family members. And sometimes the person who's not well can also be the one who is actually caregiving. For example, in Malaysia, we're a fast aging nation. By 2056, we'll be a super aged nation. So what we will find is a lot of our rare disease adults who are actually the breadwinners of their family will be the ones that will be caregiving for their aged parents or their aged loved ones. So we need to kind of stop thinking of individuals with rare disease, or doctors like to call us patients, as the ones that are receiving care, when we could well be the ones giving care. And that, I think, is a very important point that a lot of people discount. So, okay, next with that. If we, I just click next and okay. Now let's start a little bit about where we're at today and how we're feeling. So have a look at the blob tree. So those of you who are familiar with psychology and psychological first aid would have probably seen this blob tree. There's many different types of blob trees that are also downloadable. So feel free to download. It's a psychology psychometric tool. Okay, so have a look at this blob tree that you see here, or blobs that you see here, and pick 3 that you feel best resonates with you. So if you're watching this on recording, you can also do this. Pick whichever 3 blobs that you feel most resonate with you, and then we can have a little chat about it. So everyone, let's take, say, now it's 8:41 my time. Let's take maybe 2 minutes to choose 3. And if you're done, you can use the reaction button on your Zoom and raise your hand so I know that you're done. Helen's got a smiley face. Susie's got a thumbs up. So I'm guessing everyone's great. Okay, so let's start with, okay, Danielle, which one did you choose? Which are the 3 that you chose?
Okay, so I chose the bottom last one with the question mark on the head. To me, that signified sort of not too sure, or the fluctuation of it, good days and bad days. I also chose the one where the head's coming out of the pothole, just because there is sometimes a bit of caution to come out in, check your surroundings, is how I took that one. And I guess, there is the one with the riding on others' shoulders, where I think coming out of a period of dark illness, my husband at the time, my family have carried and helped me to sort of celebrate my good health right now.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Maybe Malavika, what did you choose?
I chose the first one where both of them are just sitting on that tree, because I feel like I'm in an environment where, we're meeting new people and people I already know, and we're just like sharing stuff, and it's a very nice, fun environment. The second one is the second one on the 4th row, where this person seems to be full of thoughts and, thinking about how it's going to go. Just full of thoughts. And the last one is the 4th one on the second last row, where with a little sun. I do feel like I'm in a very positive environment. I feel very positive and excited. So yeah, those 3.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And what about you, Helen? Or maybe let's go to Susie first, if Helen's doing something. Yeah.
One of the ones I picked was in the 3rd row, the second picture, the one with the 2 kids, because that's how I started this morning, where I had both kids wanting me and loving me. And then the next one would probably be in the 1st row, the second last picture of the person falling. Sometimes I feel everything's overwhelming and I just can't keep on top of everything. So I just feel like I'm free falling, which is fine, but also scary because I don't know how it's going to end. And the other one is, what was the other one? I can't remember. What was the third one? Technically, the second row, the last picture of the person flying, which is kind of the opposite of the falling. I'm also flying because I'm excited to start this new role with GSNV. I've only been here, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and I also have a couple of big events happening today, which I'm really excited about, but also really nervous about. So it's all up and down for me. I'm ungrounded for sure.
Thank you for that. Helen, are you back? Oh, she's in the middle of something. I do hear that echo that you were telling me about. I'll figure out how this is. All right. So if you notice that the journey as a caregiver very often is a mirror of emotions. And sometimes you don't even have to be a caregiver to go through so many different things, right? That's just part of life. What I like about the blob tree is it's pictorial. It's something that you can use even for people who have difficulty in expressing how they feel. So we use this on children as well to say, hey, how do you feel today? And they can just pick whatever it is. And the visual representation help you to start a conversation or create a conversation, because sometimes we're stuck, right? We can't say how we feel because there's so many things going on in our minds. And the reason why I ask you to choose more than one is because there's many days when we feel more than just one thing. We could be really grateful for the fact that we've got children we absolutely love. We could also feel extremely irritated because we can never get whatever that we need to do done. We can feel extreme amount of love for things that we never thought that we would be able to care for. We could feel affiliation, like what Malavika was talking about, that camaraderie of, let's just sit together in this safe space and know that whatever it is that you're sharing here is a safe space for you to share. So again, this is for me, even if this is a recording, it's not meant to be shared everywhere. So if you do decide to share something that is personal, do know that this is a safe space and we can actually omit it out, right? And at the same time, there are days that we feel deep frustration, and that fluctuation is something that's really hard to control. There are days that we find more on top of things, and there are days when, as Susie mentioned, we're free falling, right? And we don't know, when am I going to hit the ground? Do I want to hit the ground because it might hurt? Because at the same time, the idea of, smashing on the ground isn't exactly the best thought. But at the same time, you know that there are days as a caregiver when you don't know whether, to Susie's point, you don't know whether you're flying or whether you're falling, right? And sometimes it's a mixture of both, right? It's a mixture of, welcome to Alice in Wonderland. Everything that you have now is uncharted territory. Anyone that you speak to who lives with a condition with rare disease, and when I say live with the condition of rare disease, means you could have a loved one with rare disease, you could be the person with rare disease, you can have a significant other with rare disease, you're living with rare disease. Essentially, it's a condition that you interface with every day, right? It's really a situation where you get a map and the map is completely empty. And then it says, you're welcome, find your way, right? Very often in the conditions that you have, the more rare it is in your country, sometimes the tougher it is to find answers. So I'll give a personal anecdote. When we were first diagnosed with Phelan-McDermid syndrome, that was after about 4.5 to 5 years of searching what that might be. And that's kind of a common amount of time in Malaysia to get an accurate diagnosis, unless your rare disease is something that's very physically apparent. We had, at that point in time, seen doctors in Singapore, in India, in Australia, visiting professors that came to the country. We saw them too. We went to the government hospital, we went to the private hospital. So the first few years as a first-time parent was all to do with, I have no idea what's going on. But we knew that something was wrong. So it was, again, that feeling of second row, third down, as well as that mixture of, flying and falling. Like there are days you're saying, yeah, okay, we're doing this. The label really doesn't matter. And then there are days you feel, oh my God, the label really matters because I don't know how to fix this if I don't know what it is, right? It's not that you're trying to reverse engineer things, but understanding what the condition is or the root cause of the problem is allows you to at least understand what help is out there. So it is a mixture of feelings. So when we got the diagnosis, that was really because the genetic counselor said, hey, the geneticist said, there's a study that's being done in the US. Would you like to send your biosamples? And we said, hey, what have we got to lose? So we did. After waiting for a few weeks, close to a month and a half or so, we got our results back. But instead of getting the answers that we want, it opened up to even more questions. So we then found out that we were the only family in Malaysia and Southeast Asia with that condition. And there was no other doctors that were seeing any other patients. So we knew that either A, it could have been severely misdiagnosed, or B, it would have been a situation where patients didn't actually come forward or didn't actually want to be known. Because if you live with cancer or diabetes or hypertension or any form of disability, the want to self-identify is really your own. No one can force you to say, hey, I'm living with cancer, or I'm living with any kind of condition, because in different countries there are real and varying stigmas, right? And we don't want to discount that. So if you're in a particular country where they have support systems that are good, they have a real understanding of diversity in the workplace, then that is good for you. But there are many places out there that this is not the case. And I'm always mindful of the fact that what works for me here may not necessarily work for somebody else in a different country. So when we found out that we were the only one and the only one in the region. So of course, we went to Dr. Google, Googling away, is there an organization? I had not heard of GSNV then, had not heard of Malaysian Rare Disorders Society. But I did realize that there was a foundation for PMS, but that foundation was all the way in the US. So I wrote to them and I asked, hey, is there any other Malaysian families? Answer was no. Any other Asian families? Answer was no. The closest other family was, surprise, surprise, in Australia. So that was how the journey with other family members in other countries started. And sure enough, within 2 to 3 weeks, the foundation called back to say, hey, Nadiah, since we can't find anyone on the international registry, would you consider becoming the regional representative? And the rest is history. So all of us would have had different journeys. Some of us would have been born with the diagnosis, understanding exactly what needed to happen. Some of us inherited it from maybe our genes, or our parents, or our loved ones. Some of us actually have a condition that is in situ, happened because of an illness. So there are many different entry points to being a caregiver. There's also many different entry points to being a person who has complex medical conditions and is a caregiver. However, one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that a lot of the emotions that we are feeling are transient. As much as they feel very strong to us today, there are days that it gets worse and there are days that it gets better. So one of the best ways that I have found that has worked for me is finding what Malavika said, community and camaraderie. To be honest, I believe it is other caregivers, it is other parents and mothers that have helped me through my journey more than doctors. The doctors will probably tell you, okay, these are the medications that you can go for. These are the things that you'd have to think about. These are the ways you can care for yourself. But nothing beats talking to ladies like yourself. Nothing beats talking to another person who's actually struggling and saying, hey, I get it, I understand. Or even if I don't understand, I can resonate, and it's a very different feel from seeing someone who treats us as a number in a list of patients. Yes, all the time, peer support, definitely. So before we go to the next slide, I wanted to maybe open up a little bit about anyone here who wants to share about their experience, especially since we are recording this for other friends who might be watching it later to want to know their stories. So Danielle, you said you shared that there was a bit of a not sure feeling. There was a head picking out the pothole, thinking of where's the next best place, what's out there. But at the same time, you said, I'm at a space where after a journey of ill health, I am now celebrating the health that I have with the love of the family. So maybe could you share a little bit about what it means to be a leader in this space? You're not only with GSNV, but also an individual who's also managing challenges. And what is that like for you?
I always want to acknowledge the support that I have been given from, my closest family network. But it's also an ongoing juggle and demand. So I guess there's good days where I feel like I can connect with them, and then there's sometimes bad days where the challenge is so personal, or no one would understand certain elements of ill health, where for me it's a condition where you have good days and bad days, or because it is invisible. I am sometimes met from family that I present well, so therefore I must be well. And I guess that's where my second card that I chose about the pothole is sometimes that idea of looking around and knowing in the suite of support that I have, who would be the right ones for that right moment. And so I can be honest that my family network can't give me everything that I need. Joining GSNV has offered me, access to people who can share similar experiences, challenges, or even have a level of empathy that brought them to our organisation. That they understand, the different aspects of rare disease and caregiving, or being the individual with. So yeah, there's a lot of emotions that many times of the day of the week, which it doesn't actually have any consistency to it either. I think that's the truth. There's no consistency to the emotions that I feel with a rare disease, and sometimes I have to say there's guilt of what I had to put my family through, or my husband through, and then other times I feel like, well, yeah, that's what your role is, to support me, and I'm trying my best to heal. So yeah, I hope that's makes sense in my honesty.
No, I think it does, and it's you said three very important things actually. You said the fact that not all RDs are visible, and when you have a complex medical condition that's invisible, and mental health will be one, right? The challenge sometimes is that you look well, you seem well, why can't you act well, right? So especially when we work in organizations where employers might not be as open to the understanding of, I might just look like I'm fine, I might have all my limbs, I might not be on a wheelchair, does not mean that I'm fine, right? And for the families that we have in Malaysia, for example, for the MRKH women, we have women who, of course, are born without wombs. And that also comes with complications if your rare disease means you're actually born without an organ or a part of your body. But because on the outside, the packaging looks like you're okay. So the assumption is you must be okay, right? Or then as an individual who seems to have the outer packaging being okay, you start feeling guilty to say like, look, okay, if I look okay and everybody assumes that I'm okay, I should be okay, right? And if that's the case, why am I not okay? And then we go into this spiral of, why do I feel bad when people are saying I don't look bad, but that feeling is real? So thank you for that, and thank you for that raw sharing. I think that's super important. The other thing is acknowledging the fact that as much as we love our families may not always be the full support that we need. If we are blessed to have families with full support, then that's absolutely fantastic. But let's put it right out here. Having an individual in our lives with complicated medical conditions have led to families splitting up. And that's also another reality. It's not good, it's not bad. It's, in many situations, it is what it is, right? And we've seen fathers who become single parent, we've seen mothers who become single parent, we've also seen siblings who have stepped up. So again, it is all about what is the cultural context, what is the family support that you have, what is the norm in your country. So that's why one of the things I wanted to talk about was the cultural aspects of caregiving is actually very real, and more real than we tend to give it credit for. Susie, would you like to share? Because you've got a different perspective, right? Being a mother
Oh,
of two
yeah.
young children.
I've got
What
so
about
much
your-
upload on that one. I just want to follow on with Danielle's concept. So just in terms of living with a rare disease that is invisible, I think one of the biggest issues I've had with it is exactly as both of you said, that on the outside you look fine, on the inside you're not fine, and you get people that don't understand or don't want to understand, and you also get the opposite, where you get all the different people that want to put in their 2 cents of how you can fix things when you know you can't fix things. So with narcolepsy, it's something that I cannot control in terms of how sleepy or when I fall asleep and what's going on there. So I have medications, but the medications aren't working, especially since I've had kids. The medications aren't working as well. And also while I was trying to get pregnant and while I was pregnant and breastfeeding, I wasn't allowed to take my medication. So that was an extra complication on top of things. But then every day when you disclose to someone, or when someone finds out that you have a sleep disorder, they say, oh, you just need to sleep more, you just need to sleep less, you need to exercise more, you need to exercise less, you need to eat this diet, you need to eat that diet, you are doing something wrong, you need to, just have a positive attitude, you need to find faith and believe that God can fix things. And you just have a daily 24-hour constant influx from all these different people saying, this is how you can fix your disorder, because it's fixable when it's not. And obviously the person with the condition would have the greatest hope that there is an easy fix, that you could just do something or take something or have a different outlook on things, and all of a sudden magically it disappears. But that's not the way it is. So that is one aspect of living with a rare disease. The other one, as a mum, and especially as a caregiver for one of my children, the mum thing in Australia, at least in Australia, it's there's so many different cultures, so many different ways that families are built. But one thing that tends to remain fairly consistent when you have young kids is that, generally speaking, they're very close to their maternal mum. Especially when they're sick, especially when it's feeding time. For example, a baby needs breast milk, or you might have, your sick kids that for whatever reason prefers one parent over the other. Sometimes it is the dad or the other parent or caregiver or guardian, but generally speaking, the default is mum. Mum's the answer to everything. And that's also the case sometimes for the partner, that the mum knows everything and is in control of everything and knows all the appointments that are happening, knows exactly what we're eating this week, knows exactly what's happening with finances, knows exactly what's going on in everyone's lives around them, including their friends. Mum just has everything under control. And so that moment when you need to take time out for yourself, you kind of feel massive guilt that if I ask my parents to help out, then they're elderly, they're going to be compromised. Or if I ask my husband to help out, but he's got a late shift the next night, then he won't be able to sleep properly, and I'll look after everything and take it all on board and put myself last. And it's always that concept that whether you're a mum, a caregiver, or a person with a disorder, you're always putting yourself last. And sometimes we kind of forget about ourselves, that we also need to look after ourselves so that we can look after others. So it doesn't matter, even if I've got all 3 aspects of being a carer, being a mum, being someone with a condition, or even if it was just one of those, that concept that you never put yourself first. And when you do, you feel massive guilt. And even though there's a lot of people out there that would like to help, sometimes they can't offer the help that you need because they're not trained up enough, or they physically cannot do that. We also had obviously the COVID lockdown, where it would have been great to have a moment to myself, or a moment where I needed to focus on my son. But because of lockdown, we couldn't go to our friends and family. And the other aspect of having an invisible disease, and also for my son to have mild conditions, it makes me feel even more guilty, or a bit confused whether I should reach out for external help, in terms of, for example, in Australia, we have Carers Gateway. And when you become a carer, and when you get put onto NDIS, if you're lucky enough to get NDIS, you're offered all these services, but then you see all these people that seriously need it. And I'm happy to say they definitely need it way more than I would ever do. So then I feel like I can't reach out to Carers Gateway, or I can't reach out to these services, because there are people out there that need them more than me. And then so you always just keep putting other people before yourself. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you for that, Susie. You brought up several very, very important points. I wanted to find out if Helen wanted to share her points, and then we can kind of like speak about that together. Helen, would you like to share?
Yes, sure, but I've just dropped out 4 times, so I'm not sure if I can be heard or
It's a
can
bit
you
choppy, but we
hear
can
me?
hear you. Yeah.
It might be best just to read my comment.
All right.
But I just wanted to say I agree with I've learnt more from parents than I have from professionals, and on Susie's point, please don't think others deserve it more than you, and please reach out to Carer Gateway.
Right. So if
right, 100% right. It's just one of those things that you just keep going. I'll try again. Yeah.
Okay, so let me read what Helen wrote in the chat. She said, for us, at the beginning, when my son was born, there was no internet and so much negative information, including medical teams at the NICU, or we call it NICU, taking a photo from an old Polaroid camera every 2 days, at 2 days old, with a statement, here is a photo to help you remember your son, as he's not going to make it. Then after several weeks in NICU, we were told we were left to... we left the hospital not to tell anyone about our son's predicted diagnosis as an RTS family, to friends and other members in the community, because they will treat him and us differently. Okay, I want to raise several things here that has been mentioned, and I think they're all super important. Firstly, Susie's point, if you're a carer, if you're a mom, if you're a person with a condition, all that, when you're a wife or a person who's the main caregiver in the family, and when we say main caregiver, I'm not talking about who pays the bills, right? I'm saying care can come in so many other forms, and we know that better than anyone else, right? It's to a point where it really doesn't even matter whether you have a condition or not. We feel duty bound to kind of save everybody else. It's like the Titanic, right? Everything is sinking, but we're gonna be the ones still playing the violin, like, okay guys, let's do this, let's let everything's good. Very often when I speak to caregivers and they bring their children, and their child might have a bump or a bruise, or is in need of extra attention, I look at the mom and I look at the dad and I said, how are you really? And just the word really opens a complete floodgate, because how are you in my country, how are you means the answer is fine, thank you. Even when it's terrible, it's like, oh, fine, thank you. It's like a national answer. Fine, thank you is like, oh, alhamdulillah, very good, thank you. Because we feel compelled to not burden other people or not to tell people too much. So we're like, oh, okay, yeah, good, things are good. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that it doesn't really go down to the problem of I'm actually not okay, but I don't know how to start, because if I start this conversation, it might be a floodgate, right? So I'll just say, oh yeah, I'm fine. Okay. And it's also common to see, while we're trying to care for our young ones or our adult parents or whoever it is that we're caregiving for, we'll see the caregiver actually being the one with maybe a need for a knee surgery or hip replacement surgery, or aches and pains that after a while, let's face it, as we get older, or even before we get older, there is wear and tear. The body is like, you need to send the car for service. You can't just drive for miles and miles without ever refueling or checking the hubcap, making sure that everything is all right and your tires are not punctured. But as a caregiver, sometimes it's like, okay, we're the bum mobile. We're just going to continue despite the fact that, we're actually way past service period. We actually do need to check in and to make sure that we're okay. And how do we create that balance, right? Because when we say, when we're here to take care of everyone, sometimes the other question that we get asked is, then who takes care of us, right? And the reality of it is, more in more ways than one, we tend to take care of us. And that's it. And for a lot of parents or caregivers or individuals with very complex conditions, if they have small kids, even going to the toilet is like precious time, right? You probably have someone, there you go, Susie's laughing, because you probably got someone knocking at your door, or that time when you want to go and sit on the potty is exactly when they want to show you this fantastic thing that they found, or they'll scream at the door. That's all. Like,
There is no
welcome to
door. The door has been broken down so many times. There's no door.
There you go. So it's like a free for all, right? But at the same time, that who takes care of us, and Helen brought this up as well, right? Please don't think that sometimes we feel, yes, it's a fact. I feel guilty when I feel that I need a timeout too. But the reality of it is we can't pour out of an empty tank, right? So if we can't get that support from the immediate family members, this is where communities like GSNV or MRDS, or friends who know you, and don't expect to have that one friend who will know you all, right? So you will probably find different people in your life. Maybe it could be a cousin who knows you best for your rare disease efforts, and then your husband probably understands you in different things, right? Because we're multidimensional as people. We can't necessarily have just one person who knows us all, and that's totally fine, right? Because when I ask people, like, who do you go to? I say, I don't know. I don't have anyone that I'm really close to. And you don't have to be necessarily close to anyone. You can actually just say, okay, like, look, I'm going to be talking about being a mom of a child with mild cerebral palsy. Okay, I'll speak to this, and then if I want to actually talk about movies that I want to watch, then I'll talk to that. So there's many different parts of us. Therefore, there's many different people that we can speak to. The put yourself last, I think, is a universal challenge that we all do. And it's definitely something that we struggle with. And it is a real struggle. I think fathers sometimes have the opportunity to do this better, not because they don't put themselves last. It's just they internalize challenges differently, and they express challenges that they see differently. So, for example, Susie said here, often people don't know how to react. So they'll say, oh, that's, yeah. Or there's an awkward silence. Absolutely. In many countries, what we often hear, and this is like, since this is recorded, I wanted to put this out. A lot of people come to you and say like, oh, you're so brave, or you've been chosen to have this because you're so strong. I can't imagine what it would be if it was me. That's why, you're just amazing. As much as that is meant to soothe, that also comes from a place where they probably don't know what to say. So because of that, okay, let's say something positive with the hope of, okay, let's move this conversation, because as much as I want to empathize, I actually sympathize because I really don't know how to connect to the situation. I've even had people come up to me and say, if I see Nadiah, it's always bad news, always someone dying, or so, it's because the work that I did as my day job prior to the work that I've got right now, is dealing with a lot of children with trauma, and therefore sometimes abuse cases leading to death, etc., etc. But I felt so hurt when I first heard that. I'm like, look, you might be here sipping your coffee and you're thinking like, oh, here comes this girl, the bad news. But think about the parent or the family member that had just lost a sibling, that, you've just, to me, it felt like they've diminished someone's life, right? Then I told myself, look, not everyone will understand what we do. Not everyone is meant to understand what we go through. And sometimes we just have to let it go and not waste our energy in being upset with people who will never understand. So we're like, okay, you're not my tribe. Moving on. And that actually is one way of, saving yourself from being unnecessarily upset. Because sometimes we try and get into this conversation of explaining ourselves to people who really just, it's a waste of time. So we don't, right? Just moving on. Let's talk to someone who actually do understand what we're going through. Helen, since you're in the caregiving space, you meet so many people, and I really resonated with what you mentioned with what happened to you with your child in an ICU, because for my daughter going to the university hospital, it meant that we were kind of like the guinea pigs, right? So we'd be there, and then there'll be young doctors coming in, writing notes. And the irritating part was when they would ask the same questions like 20,000 times, because for you it'd be a repeat, for them it's the first time. So we had to kind of wire our brains to say like, look, if we want more people to get diagnosed, then more people need to understand. And even if it's the 100th time I'm saying this is probably the first time they're hearing it. So it does take a bit of a rewiring. And as a young parent, sometimes it's natural to feel emotional about the situation. But as you mature up, you realize, okay, there's some things that are needed. So let's help the system, right? Helen, did you want to share a little bit? Because you said I get those words all the time. What sort of words? Is it the "you're so strong"?
Yeah, so strong. God chose you. You're an
Yes.
angel. There was a reason. There's a reason why you were given Ben. It's just all, you see the emotive I use. It's not helpful at all.
So as caregivers, what would we like to hear instead? Let's ideate what would we prefer to hear instead.
More acknowledging it must be a really tricky world. It must be hard work. You must be exhausted, because it opens up that question of, yeah, I am. And then the next question might come is, how can I help you? Hopefully. And then that might open the doors to opportunity. So, but also knowing that we're only humans. So I often say that I'm only a human being, and what you see as is a facade. And sometimes deep within, it's not the same. Deep within my heart and my soul and my mind, it's not what you see.
That's brilliantly put. Malavika, I'm sure you've been in many awkward situations. Being in the position of being in an awkward position, what would you do?
No, I was just listening to everyone speak about their experience, and I come from a very different perspective because I have a medical background. So I worked as a dentist for a couple of years, and during my training, I can totally understand where the most important thing is just diagnosing the patient. And once you're done with that, your job's done. You assume that the patient is in a happy place, their caregivers are in a happy place because you did what you could do. But then now, since I'm in the public health space, and especially with GSNV, and just talking to caregivers, it makes you realize where the diagnosis, if you're lucky enough to get one, is just the first step. There's
The beginning, right? Yeah.
It's just the beginning, and you don't understand everything that they have to go through with the diagnosis and just the caregiving aspect of it. And I also realized a recurring theme is guilt. It's not just the person experiencing the disease or the guilt that they have to go through, but there's also the guilt that the caregiver goes through, where I don't know if it's a cultural thing where I'm from India. We don't usually talk about our mental health. So the caregivers usually feel guilty on sharing how they feel. Again, coming back to the point of where you said, how are you really feeling? A lot of people don't say that they're not doing well because they feel guilty to share that, because they feel,
Yes.
oh, my child or whoever I'm looking after is going through something much more difficult. I should just accept what I'm going through and not, maybe share that.
You said several important points. One was, yes, very much so. The diagnosis is just the beginning of the journey, right? That's why we're saying welcome to Alice in Wonderland, because you don't actually have, after that it's a Mad Hatter's day, right? So there's so many different things that are going on. The other is, I think, with more acceptance and understanding and empathy, it helps not only healthcare professionals, but also caregivers and allied healthcare professionals realize that it really does take a village to help support families with complex medical conditions. And it's not just because you're the caregiver, you could be the significant person who is going through that complex medical condition and being a caregiver. And I think some of the doctors that I've spoken to, the amazing thing is, from the societies and the rare disease groups that I've seen, some of the young doctors that are coming up are actually siblings or people who have lived with these conditions, and this was their norm, to the point of why I put Brandon in the beginning, Goda. This becomes their norm, and then they then hopefully come up with the new breed of healthcare professionals that have a lived experience of some sort to say, look, yes, I understand that as a healthcare professional, I'm trying to help you demystify what's going on with you. However, I understand that there's a whole journey that you have to go through. And I'm here with you on this journey because as much as I'm trying to tell you what it is, you're teaching me about how it can be and what it will be. So there is a real need for a symbiotic relationship between healthcare professionals, allied health professionals, schools, in fact, places of work, etc., etc. In fact, now in Malaysia, we see also places of worship being part of the conversation on complex medical needs and health. Then that I think is super, super important. The other thing you said was a very Asian thing, and I wanted to highlight this, the word accept, right? And I loved that you said that because we see a lot of that all across Southeast Asia and the West as well. It's not just an Asian thing now, right? Some people call it karma, some people call it kismet, some people call it qada and qadar. Some people just call it, that's life's fate or whatever the word that you want to call it. But it is all rooted in the concept of you just need to accept this is part of life, right? While I have to appreciate that in many different places, it is actually about acceptance because you cannot ideate a different way out of things. I'll give you an example. Just last week, I was in Lisbon at a conversation with 30 different countries representing different rare diseases, and we had the representatives from Ukraine. There, where they were at the current situation that they're in, there had to be some level of acceptance because of the fact that there's so many things that are going on that are not ideal, and they had to kind of pick their battles. So that acceptance is not necessarily, in my language, it's called pasrah. It's not giving up, but it's understanding that at the current situation that we're in, we have to prioritize. Therefore, we've boxed this in. Okay, I accept that this is the current status quo. This should not be the status quo for forever. I have to accept that this is what I have to deal with for now in this manner. But in other places, there is this acceptance of I've literally had parents telling me, maybe I was bad in my past life and this is why I'm being, punished now. And there's deep sense of, if I am better and I really sacrifice myself now, I might come back as a better individual in my next reincarnation or whatever the belief that you have, right? But what I try to tell them is there's a big difference between accept and it's best to explain in my language because it has a different connotation than in English. But one is pasrah and the other is reda. So pasrah means just accept and basically giving up, right? You've just sort of like given into the situation that this is what it is. Reda means I appreciate that this is the situation, but I'm not giving up. So what we want to get families to go is, yes, I accept that this is the diagnosis, this is the label. However, this is not the death sentence of my family. This just means I now have a background of what to work with, and I have to work towards the best possible outcome in the life that I have. And that's very different from accepting this is all that I have as my lot in life. Therefore, I will just kind of go on down this route. One is you're the victim of the situation, and the other is you're in the driver's seat, despite the fact that you've accepted that, yeah, okay, I drew this card, this is what I have, but I'm going to make the best version of this card. I think it's important for caregivers to realize that when we say, please accept, that the first step of living with a rare condition is acceptance, it doesn't mean giving up. In no way does it mean giving up. It actually means, hey, you've just been given a challenge card. Now let's see what are we going to be doing with this. And see what sort of memories and meaningful journeys that we can create with the challenges that we have. Okay, so thank you so much for that. And I hope that this little blurb is helpful. You can use it for many different things. And they come in many different formats, trees, football, clinics, things like that. So there's many different ways of using it. Okay, Daniel, can you click next? So I wanted to kind of give an overview on understanding caregiver mental health and the unique challenges that we face. If you look at some of the data sets that are out there, globally, the caregiving space, if we thought about it as an economy, right? So for those who are watching, globally, caregiving is, of course, we know, universal. Very often it is on the woman or the girl child of the family. It can be paid or it can be unpaid, and it is present across every single culture, every single country, every single socioeconomic background all across the world. But if we look at it as an economy, if we assume that it was an economy, actually, caregiving is the third largest global economy next to the US and China. Why? Because the number of people who would otherwise be part of the caregiving economy and participating in the caregiving economy formally, like nurses, like people who are in the allied health professionals, for example, and all the way to stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home parents and caregivers, combine together what their worth would be in taxpayers' money, in opportunity costs, in the things that they could have contributed to the economy, is the third largest economy next to US and China. And that's huge, especially in an aging population that we live in. And I know that Australia is also an aging population. The caregiving economy or the caregiving sector is definitely one which very often gets talked about, but not necessarily tackled in the way that it should be, like fully comprehensively tackled. If we look at a study that came out from Boston Consulting Group several years back, if you're talking about the caregiving economy in the US, this is a combine of paid and non-paid. It's about US $6 trillion. This is as at May 2020. In Malaysia, it is also a few $million. In August 2023, Australia's care economy, this is for Australia, Australia's care economy was set to increase from where we're at right now at 8% of your GDP, all the way to 15% of your GDP in the next, say, 40 years or so by 2073, which means that the government has already earmarked that, yes, there is an aging population. Yes, there is a need for caregiving economy. Yes, there is a need for people who are either paid or unpaid, but are actually doing a lot of the caregiving for the citizens of the country. And as much as the government is trying to quantify what this is, support is still very much a problem if you're talking about comprehensive, connected, cohesive support all across the world. And when we're talking about mental health, if you look at the National Alliance for Caregivers Association in the US, they were doing a study on the impact of caregiving for a lot of caregivers in America. They had studied that between 40 to 70% of caregivers had actually shown signs of clinical depression, and between quarter to half of them had actually shown signs of major depression if they actually did do a diagnostic on where they're at right now. So the reality of it is everything that you've mentioned earlier, except take care of ourselves last, feeling guilt, not knowing where to find support, sometimes being the guinea pig of other people trying to understand what the condition is. All this actually contributes to a lot of these stresses, whether you see it or whether you don't see it, whether we acknowledge or whether we don't acknowledge it. But having said that, we're often also told that caregivers have a superpower because not because they accept everything, but it's because of the fact that they have been so challenged day in, day out that they learn to see humor in the most unlikeliest of places. Like, how many of you have laughed over things that other people will not understand because for you it's funny? Because laughter is also a way that we cope, right? For example, I've seen people talking, we have a youth with cardiomyopathy, and she says, hey, guess what? There was a power outage yesterday and my oxygen machine didn't run. And she's laughing about it, and all of us are thinking, like, oh my God, that's not a good thing. But for her, it's like, yay, how many other things can go wrong, right? So there are many different ways in which we find humor. Sometimes it becomes a bit of a dark humor. One of the things that we also have to acknowledge that as caregivers, sometimes we become more patient over things that we don't necessarily need to be patient for, but we become less patient for things that we should be more patient for because we expect people to understand. Like, look, you know me, you've seen me for 17 years struggling with this condition. You should know this already. I don't have to tell you. But there are times in which, you know, you could have easily snapped, but somehow you're extra patient on that day. So that fluctuation, to your point, Danielle, that you really don't know on what day you're going to be more patient or less patient because there are many different triggers to what helps us to behave. Okay, so next. What I wanted to share was here in the next few slides, let's talk about some of the common caregiving challenges. And I think this will be useful because what I believe we will find through this exercise is we either bundle things up or we actually discount the amount of challenges that we've actually been able to surmount or been able to manage. So if you're watching this on the recording, please take out your pen and paper and let's kind of jot that down. So I'm going to give everyone, say, about 3 minutes or so what are some of the common caregiving challenges that you have? And you can write it any which way you want. You can draw it out, and then let's have a discussion about that. So again, once we're done, let's give ourselves a thumbs up. I think if we were to ever really spend time writing all of the different caregiving challenges, it would look a bit like, you know, when you go to the hypermarket to buy a week's grocery, and the guy keeps printing and it keeps going on. It's like this long bill. It will probably look like that super long receipt, right? Because each line item will have 3 or 4 smaller items underneath that. So how many did you get, Danielle?
Oh, I put myself in the shoes of my my ex-husband, so my husband at the time, and the caregiving challenges that he went through was very gendered. And I think I watched him constantly explain or seek flexibility in his work or with his friends, and it was just not as as flexible or emotionally flexible for him to give him space to be a male carer, actually, because I think there is that perception in society that his role was to just work and come home, and that's his priority. But in fact, I mean, adding to the common caregiving challenge, he had to be available 24/7. So I think that caused a lot of anxiety build up as well, because you never know if the phone call was, in my case, oh, my lungs are bleeding, please take me to hospital, which is something that actually happened. But to be constantly waiting for the next thing is challenging, I think, in my observation of the caregiving space. But yeah, I think I'm from a culturally diverse background, but even though I've been in Australia for, for over 35 years, in my network, the cultural challenges of assuming that he just came home was really detached from the reality of coming home, having to cook, clean, do the groceries, everything that I couldn't do. It was a one-person show when you are completely, in a space of acute illness. The load was carried by one individual. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think that's a very important point, gender and caregiving dynamics, right? Certainly, there's a lot of stereotypes, I think, and jaundiced views about caregiving still. In fact, the same way women are expected to just do it all in some cultures, there's also this expectation of males not assuming caregiving roles because they're just seen as the provider and the nurturer. Whereas, the reality of it is life is not cut and dry like that. And thank you very much, Helen, for sharing this. I'm going to give a quick shout out just in case her audio drops off. So Helen shared that she's a trained national facilitator for Free Healthy Mothers, Healthy Families HMHF program that's currently being delivered by Kindred. So if you're interested in participating, there are free workshops, there are peer support groups for mothers and children with disability of any age and any diagnosis. She's given the link here. And Helen, I'm sure Daniel and the rest of the GSNV team will be very happy to share the link to the rest of the participants who might be watching this later. So thanks for that. Super important that we have a resource that is readily available. What about you, Susie? How many did you get?
I had 3 main ones that weren't raised before. So one of them, at least in Australia, as a caregiver, I struggled with not actually knowing what support is available in terms of benefits and entitlements. So you're not made aware of, for example, the carers card. You're not made aware of support groups unless you go ahead and Google it yourself and find the groups all by yourself. And same with Centrelink, for example, what kind of benefits you're actually entitled to, what you're not entitled to. And it's a huge thing to navigate, and you need to know absolutely everything about yourself in order to actually even start trying to apply for these benefits. So that's one big aspect that I'm having a challenge with. Another common one is that as a carer, your social life and even your work life is, generally speaking, put second best. So sometimes you can't go out with friends, or you can't participate in things because you are a carer. Sometimes you can't participate in full-time work or even work at all because you are a carer. And so just the ability to get that balance of having a social life and having a work life or any other life, you can't do that. And I think really importantly, something that needs to be mentioned is the unacknowledged grief that carers have. As in, I don't so much mean carers that, actually, you know what, even carers that aren't related to the person they're caring for, because they would see a lot of things that would affect them mentally as well. But just the grief of, for example, for myself as a mum, I remember early on I was grieving my son's future because I didn't know if he'd be able to lead a fully normal, successful life. I grieved for my lack of time to myself, or the ability to be able to do work as I want to, or be social how I'd like to, or have, play dates for my kids with other kids, like all the things that you would have taken into account as having a normal life before your diagnosis, or before you're made aware of whatever's happening. You already have this future planned, and so that grief that you have for the loss of the future that you were hoping for. And so really just that unacknowledged grief for the carers and the families as well.
Fantastic. I think you brought up some points which although we did say we didn't want to go too deep into grief, I think it's important to acknowledge that grief is not just about when someone dies, right? A lot of people assume that grief is due to the loss of someone, or grief only starts when the death event occurs, right? Or the illness event occurs. But the reality of it is you can grieve well before anyone passes. You can grieve, to your point, Susie, the loss of agency, the loss of time, the loss of ability to self-determine what you want as a future for yourself. Sometimes you grieve for uncertainty of a future that you're not sure about what would come and what would be, especially for those that we care about. And I think that's a very important point to make, because a lot of us assume that, why are you so sad? Because it's still here. Like, why are you feeling so down? Just cheer up. It doesn't work like that, because living with uncertainty is grief in itself, right? It's trying to figure out, if I wake up tomorrow, what are some of the things that I can expect? And I think living in constant flux, living in a constant, I'm not sure what's going to happen, which is Daniel's aptly put, that, peeking your head out of the little hole, thinking like, okay, is it safe? Is this going to be a complete disaster today? Or can I come out and it's going to be okay, right? that unknown itself, that constant change, is what hampers a lot of positive mental health growth, because you really, to Susie's earlier point, you don't have a grounding factor. So very often you try and ground yourself through many different things: love, faith, purpose, and all this works for different people. It'll be different things. It could be money for some people if you find that money grounds you. But the reality of it is, when you live with a significant other with a complex medical situation or condition, or you yourself going through it, that just exacerbates the unknown. And that's why this feeling of grief happens in so many more ways than people see or accept or think it should happen, right? That's one. The other is the thing about algorithms. Helen mentioned about this, Susie mentioned about this as well. Search engines is as much a help as it is a complete disaster. Now we've got ChatGPT and IR 5.0 going into the picture, right? Everyone's a doctor. And I often hear that healthcare professionals saying, yeah, I've got patients coming in and so certain that they're going to die, or so certain that this is their condition because they've Googled it ahead of time, come in and say, I've got a rash, I've got the spot here, I look like this, therefore I'm going to die tomorrow because this is the condition that I have. It's because you read it out of Google, right? So it's a conundrum on both sides. So while I do believe that search engines have been a great help for me in trying to find other peer support networks, I don't trust search engines if I want to understand everything there is to know about my condition. I'd rather go pick up the phone, speak to Susie and say, hey, how does this feel? If I do this, what is it? Then she'll probably say, well, in my experience, it's like this. I don't know what it would be for you, but this is what has happened to me, right? And that lived experience, to what Helen was mentioning earlier, the peer support group, you probably find is a money can't buy experience, because it's something that has been lived, done, tested, it didn't work, and it might work for you, right? However, the challenge with the algorithms online, and I want to put this online so that it can get recorded, is when you search for something, you will get what you're searching for. It will feed you more of what you want or what you don't want, because you've basically fed the language operating system to say, hey, give me more of what it is that I'm trying to look for. So if I want to say vaccines causes rare disease, for example, let's bust this myth once and for all. A lot of people say in Malaysia during the COVID-19 pandemic, the whole anti-vaxxers movement started coming in and saying, hey, you guys have rare disease. Is it because you were vaccinated? Is it a vaccine issue? I told you vaccines are bad for you. That's why you all came out as, for the lack of a better word, the F word, right? but the point is, vaccines have got nothing to do with rare disease. Yes, some of us may have other comorbidities which make vaccine even more deadly for us, but it wasn't the vaccine that made us individuals living with rare disease, right? That's one thing for sure. And so when you Google that, that's what you can get. You're bound to have someone who has written unsolicited, not scientifically proven information. So on the one hand, while the internet has been able to connect us, and I'm grateful for the fact that thanks to the internet, here we are today, right? We're in this session, 4 or 5 different cultures coming together, having this great discussion that would not have been possible without the internet. And thanks, Alan Turing, for that. But at the same time, the other side of that is we need to also take the agency to understand what we should believe and what we should digest and what we should actually set aside. So that's important. The other thing I wanted to mention is a common challenge that I find parents and caregivers have is this understanding of it's better not to know. For example, if I have a family member with breast cancer, so there's a high probability that other members of the family might have breast cancer, I'm not going to do a mammogram. I'm not going to check because it's best not to know. Because chances are, if I know, immediately after I know, I start getting sick. As long as I don't know, I'm still healthy because I'm sort of telling my mind I'm fine. And this often also happens to families with rare disease, not because they don't want to know if they have a rare disease. They don't want to know other health challenges that come with being a caregiver of rare disease. For example, the wear and tear of maybe realizing that you've got high blood pressure or hypertension or a heart that's failing because you might be living under a lot of stress. Because to Susie's point, I just need to function. I need to be able to do everything that I need to do. So if I know that I'm ill, then I'm going to be even more traumatized, or I'm going to be even more stressed out. So better not to know that I'm actually sick. Helen, in your experience being a peer support facilitator and trainer, what are some of the ways that you've been able to address this and share with families to say, hey, you know, it's a good thing to kind of get yourself health checked, to know how you can help yourself better before it becomes worse, for example?
I just add
Well,
something there after Helen, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I don't know if
Hey.
you're, I don't know if you hear me. Can you hear me? Yep. It's just about being aware of what caring, how caring can affect your own body, your own mind, your own mental health, and your overall well-being. It's acknowledging it, and it's also, we discuss opportunities of how, and we do use the Carer Gateway a lot in regards to promoting and getting funded supports for a carer. And so that's what we promote in that health and wellbeing space, but also connecting to like-minded, supportive others, the ones that get it. We're not living in each other's backyards, but we get it. We understand each other and we support each other. And to me, that's just power in itself. And, you know, some mums are hanging out to catch up for the workshop, but I'm also on a lot of My Time peer support groups and just connecting with My Time. And you know, it's different, especially if it's complex and you've got someone else talking about a child with behaviours, but we're still living in a similar situation, that we're different to our family members and or friends, families. So just connection. I think that's my promotion.
Connection. Okay. And for further information, please go to https://healthymothers-healthyfamilies.com. So this is an advert for peer support networks, or kindred.org.au.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Susie, what about you?
I just really wanted to add this real life story. This is completely unfabricated, and Malavika, I think you might enjoy this one just because of the dentistry aspect of this. I'm going to give you 3 examples of interactions I've had with 3 different dentists. So each of the 3 were during either, I think it was just after my pregnancies with both kids. So interactions I've had with dentists after I had just had a kid. So I've got a newborn, I'm sleep fatigued, I'm also off my medication for narcolepsy, so I'm also even more having issues with staying awake and looking after myself. But at least I made it to the dentist. That's the main thing, is that I managed to get, you know, 5 minutes away so I can go to the dentist, get my teeth cleaned and go back to my life at home. So the first dentist that I used to go to routinely, that I visited after my first pregnancy, so after I had my first child, very young lady, lovely lady, great dentist. But then at some point when she's cleaning my teeth, she said, oh, you know, how often do you floss? How often do you brush your teeth? And I said, I don't remember the last time I brushed my teeth. And it was one of those things where you're already ashamed because, you know, you should brush your teeth at least twice a day, every day. It's not something that anyone would normally want to, you know, not put part of their routine, but there are certain days where you just cannot even think about anything apart from feed the baby, go to sleep, wake up, maybe eat if somebody puts food in your mouth, but otherwise you won't even eat, you won't even look after yourself. So that dentist gave me a massive rant of, you know, you must look after your teeth, you must brush your teeth at least twice a day, and you have to floss, you can't and I just felt like a horrible person, that, you know, it was my fault. I really should look after myself more, even though I knew that I couldn't. So the fact that I actually made it to the dentist, they didn't mention it to her, that, look, the fact that actually I'm here today is a sign that I actually do care about my body still, but this is the most I can do. So that was after the first pregnancy. I went to a different dentist after a while, and then so I went to this other lady. And so when I had my son, I went in again to get my teeth cleaned, and similar story of like, oh, look, you really should brush your teeth every day at least once. I'll clean this up, and you haven't got any fillings that you need, but you know, you really should still take better care of yourself. And then just again kind of made me feel a bit horrible about not looking after myself and what kind of a example I'm giving to my kids. So again, felt that judgment. And then so I ended up finding another dentist, which happens to be at the end of my street. And I went to them and I was gearing myself, getting ready for, oh no, here we go with the lectures. And no, this woman actually sat me down and said, look, you're a mum, you've got your own condition, you've got this, you've got that. How about we have more frequent appointments and I clean your teeth? And yes, I understand. I'm still going to say, you know, try to floss, try to brush your teeth. But if you cannot do it, how about we accept it and you just come in more often and I'll keep an eye on your teeth. And that was, I literally burst into tears and I thanked her and I gave them amazing Google reviews, because finally here is someone that is a professional that, you know, has to do their job and has to promote health. But at the same time, that acknowledgement of life is tough. Sometimes you cannot do this. You cannot do what you know you need to do. Here's how I can help. And so having that professional there that could actually step in and help me out the best to her ability made a huge difference. And also same with the friends network or the people around me, the people that, you know, kept giving me unhelpful ideas of how I can manage my disorder. I ended up letting them go because I had no positive feedback from me. It was always an issue meeting with these people. My closest friends are now the ones that I don't have to talk to. They can come over to my house, they can sit down on my couch, they can turn the TV on, they can feed themselves, and we're perfectly fine and we're the best of buddies. But they're also the people that just take one look at me and go, how about I make you a tea? How about I, you know, clean the kitchen for you? Don't worry about it. They don't even ask, they just know exactly what I need to do. And they're the ones that I'm surrounding myself with now, because that's what I need. I need someone that I don't need to exhaust effort towards, and they just get me and they're comfortable sitting in silence with me, or they're comfortable to talk about anything and they're there for you. So that's probably one of the things I was also going to say in terms of like a common issue that caregivers have is just the flack you get for not looking after yourself from the professionals, whether it's a GP or a dentist or whatever it is.
Or in-laws and outlaws and extended family members. We haven't even started that. So we have a for the PMS group, when we have our family conference, we actually have separate sessions for moms, dads, siblings, extended family members, and new families with diagnosis. But in Malaysia, we also try and have sessions where we call it in-laws and outlaws, right? Because very often, not understanding the situation also comes with well-meaning statements that actually don't necessarily help, like, oh, you should care for yourself better. Or it could be a situation where, oh, you're just too busy. Why are you so busy all the time, right? So there's many different ways in which people try to show that they care. But to your point, Susie, what I love about what you said is sometimes it is just about the presence. You don't necessarily have to say anything. You don't have to give any feedback or advice, because it's sometimes not feedback or advice that we need. It's the affirmation or just the presence of another human soul beside us. I think some of the best friends that I've seen in the rare disease space are those that are able to sometimes not even say anything, be with you in the time of crisis. If you need to cry, they'll probably cry with you. But it's that sitting and being comfortable in the quiet and being comfortable in the discomfort and just sitting beside you and leaning in. And if they feel comfortable, just have their hand over your shoulder. If they're closer than that, then just give you a hug. And that's it. The power of the hug, more than, I wish I understood how you feel. It's so much more healing than having a prepared text speech about how you want to make that person feel better. And I sometimes feel that we need more of that human connection than trying to figure out what will be the best way or what are the best things to say. Nice needed silence can be difficult for people. Often others feel, yes, definitely. Because I think now more than before, we're wired to fill in the silence with things to say. It's also because we ourselves are uncomfortable with the silence. And being comfortable with the silence actually is to me is a strength. It's not easy. It's not easy to be okay with not being okay. And it's also not easy to sit and watch someone feeling bad or sad or hurting and just being present with them and saying, this is perhaps not the space for me to offer advice or anything. I'm just going to be present and placehold, right? The power of placeholding, I think, is super important. So, Miss Dentist, do you want to say anything about about your experiences? But I love the fact that, Susie, you mentioned this because we've seen this in pediatricians and gynecologists and so many different healthcare professionals who probably, I think it's because they treat us as patients, right? Rather than the whole person. So thoughts?
I'm so sorry, Susie, you had to go through that. No one deserves to go through that. But I understand where the dentist is coming from, maybe because I have experience in the field. It's this aspect of tough love where they just have to give you advice, and then they make it sound really forceful. You have to do it. This is what you're supposed to do. Maybe, just changing that up a little bit and being a little more empathetic and trying to understand where the other person's coming from might work out in a better way, because you know what you're doing, you know what you're not doing as well, and you're not there for advice. You're just there for maybe, a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of, acknowledgement that you did take this step. You put in the effort, you're there, you're, working on it. But, when you get the advice and, all the negativity with it, it's kind of like a step back, and you probably wouldn't want to do it again. So, yeah, I hope people become more empathetic and try to be more understanding rather than just making people feel bad for a couple of decisions they made.
I think that was the other thing too, especially with my current dentist. Just the fact that there was that acknowledgement, B, there wasn't shaming. It was just like, okay, I'm still going to tell you that you should do this, and so still gave me the skill, but it was delivered in a totally different context. And not just that, it was like, how can I help? Just that extra step of like, okay, well, I can see you struggling with this. Do you need further education? Do you need extra appointments? Like, what is it that you need from me that would help you get to a normal, a normal routine? Actually, just rather than just giving a lecture, it's like, okay, well, I know, like, obviously your patients already know that they need to clean their teeth, but how? Like, if they're currently already failing to do that, what's actually the barrier? What do you need from me to make you get past that barrier or barriers? But yeah, definitely. Like, I definitely understood where the other two dentists were coming from, but I just went, oh, really? I know.
Yeah, and I think it's important, right, for us to as those listening, and we might not be necessarily people with a significant other living with rare disease. It might actually just be anything, right? Being mindful of the person's situation and saying, how might I be able to help, is a huge help. Even if the answer you might get is actually there's nothing you can do at this moment in time. That might well be the answer that you might receive. But the fact that you actually opened yourself up and said, hey, is there anything that I can help with? And genuinely say it and mean that. Of course, there's tons of people who say, can I help? But don't really want to help. But if you say you're going to help, then be really open to the fact that, hey, is there anything that I can help with? I might not be well versed in the condition that you have, but if there's anything that I can help you with, to your point, Susie, can I make you a cup of tea? Would you want me to help watch over your children for a while if you trust them? And then this itself is a huge deal. Like, Susie, I'm sure being able to go to the toilet without having being bothered is good too, right? So give me 10 minutes so I can, go to the toilet in peace, and I'll come out and like, okay, I'll do whatever else that I need to do. So, okay. So the next few slides are going to be some of the common challenges. And the reason why I put common like that is because everybody will have a different kind of menu. So let's take a look and let's see how many of this perhaps are things that we know but never acknowledged. One right on top is, of course, anxiety and depression, which we've mentioned earlier. So I'll skip through that. And I think a lot of people know this. Then all of you actually mentioned high rates of guilt and sadness and dread and worry. So thank you for being participatory in the social experiment. You've actually helped me deliver the material without having to deliver the material. And, witnessing the suffering of other relatives and feeling that we not only resonate, but we feel compelled to be doing even more than what we actually can, even when we are struggling. The other thing is becoming easily irritated or upset over things. As we mentioned earlier, sometimes we get more patient over certain things and more irritable over others. And that feeling of isolation and abandonment, which Helen pointed out, not only because of having social media or the lack of social media, but sometimes as caregivers and people with complex medical conditions, you can feel isolated and alone even when you're in a crowd. You don't have to be physically alone to feel alone. And Danielle, I know that you would resonate with this because sometimes you would be surrounded by so many people and still feel alone, right? There will be so many things that I wish I can tell someone, but even if I do, you're not going to understand. So I'm just going to keep it to myself. And then that perpetuates as I am feeling alone even when I'm in a crowd. Thank you for attending. And then that anticipatory grief, to your point of what's to come. Then we would talk about physical health concerns. Okay, let's not even talk about, you mentioned it, Susie, you said fatigue, you said sleep problems, you said risk of illness. We haven't actually mentioned mortality. Now, the reason why I want to mention this is because during the pandemic, we have seen, in fact, the last 3 months have been a difficult period for the PMS community. We've seen quite a few deaths, not only deaths in terms of our children living with PMS. It is part of the condition that we have. But during the pandemic, we actually had a father who had lost his job because of the pandemic and having to be laid off. And as much as he was a pillar of support for so many people in the community, he was, to the point of what Danielle was mentioning, silently suffering, right? With a lot of different things that he could not share even with others. And he took his life, basically, in the middle of the pandemic. And I wanted to raise this here because as much as people tell you that you are strong, admitting that we have moments of weakness is courage. Admitting that we don't have it all takes strength. Saying that, look, I'm struggling right now and I have no idea where to go, what to do, is bravery. Because it is not easy in the society that we live in to acknowledge that we're vulnerable. Showing vulnerability is courage. Right? So I want to put it right out there that saying that I'm struggling is not a bad thing. But the next step is, how do we help ourselves to get help? Or for those of us who are seeing somebody struggling, how do we then say, hey, how can I help? Because I have spoken to many parents in the rare disease community that have said, Nadiah, I can't take it anymore. I think I'm going to go for a divorce. Or Nadiah, I can't take it anymore. I have considered taking my life. Now, when someone tells you that, for me, it means that there's still hope. They're still thinking about it. They know they shouldn't do it. There's an ideation. If you're really going to commit suicide, you would have done it already. You wouldn't actually say, hey, I need to talk to someone because I'm having, self-harm ideation happening, because you're still thinking about it. The minute you're really going to do it, you're not going to declare to the world that you're going to do it. With the exception of people who now find that there is a fetish in self-harm. Now, that's a different thing. That's actually a mental health challenge, and that has nothing to do with caregiver grief. That is a different thing where people actually, for the chasing of likes, for the chasing of followers, have actually done many things of self-harm. Now, the reason why I wanted to raise that as well is because we have young individuals now who are youth or adolescents living with rare disease. One thing that we have to acknowledge is, more than just being individuals with rare disease, they want to identify as teenagers, as adolescents, as their own self. They have love interests. They want to be a K-pop YouTuber superstar, whatever it is that they want to do, right? So the labels may not define them, but as caregivers, we're so wired towards ensuring that they survive, that they're healthy, that they're well, that they go to school. Sometimes we forget to ask them, what is it that you want to be? Like, what's the future that you envision for yourself? In 2017, 2018, the Malaysian Rare Disorders Society started this youth program where we wanted to support our rare disease youth to ideate the future that they wanted for themselves. So we had this little Shark Tank program, which supported 3 different ideas. One was on mobility, the other was on advocacy, and the third one was Body Beautiful, basically positive body image. And out of the 3, one is now a UNDP UNICEF youth advocate that started up her own social enterprise startup in mapping accessible spaces across Kuala Lumpur. The other one became the youngest board member of the MRDS, and the third one actually launched Malaysia's first modeling agency for persons with disability and rare disorders. And they don't let their disease define them. 2 of them have spinal muscular atrophy. one had osteogenesis imperfecta, and the other one had ectodermal dysplasia. All three were conditions that were very physically apparent. You were either on a wheelchair, or you looked like you were kind of crunched in, or you were known as the vampire disease, right? So all of them were very physically apparent conditions, but that didn't stop them. However, in them trying to find their way, they've also shared that there are many people out there that are quite wicked who have strange fetishes and look for people with rare disease or wheelchair bound and have, weird things that they like. So it's also important for us to understand the space in which our youth are going into, not just about them living with a rare condition, but what it is that they are trying to live in and be in the space of trying to be an adolescent in an unknown space of trying to find themselves and come to be while having rare diseases. And then, of course, we had other things, for example, adverse changes to health status, talking about services of health and how we use medication. Not everyone has access to orphan drugs. In fact, only 5% have access to orphan drugs. And then how we manage stress and deregulation of stress hormones. Okay, next. Then when we talk about the concept of functional and cognitive impairment and secondary strains, I think it's important that we acknowledge that, to your point, Susie, sometimes as a caregiver, we have a greater need for help, for activities of daily living. It might be, keeping the house clean, or cooking and brushing your teeth, or helping the family send the kids go to school. So it's not necessarily things that are super complex and we need help in. Sometimes it's just a little leg up in the everyday things that would help our lives feel so much better. But because we're unable to tap into, hey, can you help me send the kids today? I just really need time out. I'll be back after that. I'll pick them after school, but I just really need you to send them in the morning. And because we can't bring ourselves to say, hey, can you help me with that? We will do the morning and the evening and the tuition and the football and everything else after. And then we're so knackered after that the next day is like a zombie cycle, right? So very often this is an invisible area of a caregiving challenge. So thank you so much for raising that, right? And I think that's an important part. And while we're at that, we start forgetting things because there's so many things in input and, downloaded in this brain of ours, although it is a supercomputer in itself, we start forgetting things. It's not uncommon for people telling me, wait, where is that milk carton that I was trying to find? And it's actually just on top of the fridge because, we're running around looking for things that it becomes invisible, right? Other secondary strains, and I wanted to highlight back about what Danielle mentioned on her ex-husband. One was gender and dynamics, the whole idea of work and unemployment, flexi hours, not only reduction of hours, sometimes just flex, right? The ability to understand how we can manage where work starts and where work ends. Because the reality of it is, coming into the pandemic, work just became 24/7. It stopped becoming 9 to 5. It just kind of like went into this creeping into every crevice that you can find in the hours of the day, right? And it was called flexible hours. so in some senses it worked, but in some senses it just blurred the lines completely. And of course, anyone that has individuals or loved ones with complex medical needs will know that not everything is covered by your NDIS or NHS or welfare or healthcare systems in your different countries. In Malaysia, a lot of things for rare disease, if it's outside of the basic UHC coverage, is actually out of pocket. And in many countries, individuals with rare disease can't even open a bank account or can't even open an insurance account because of the fact that they might have challenge in cognition, challenge in cognitive functioning, which then does not allow them to open bank accounts, financial instruments. And that leads to an extra strain not only on them, but also on the family, because what is the savings that you have once your caregivers are gone? Therefore, that then adds strains to the caregiver thinking about how do I actually plan ahead? To Susie's point of how do we then manage the grief of not knowing how else to care for our children? The relationship stress is real. I have had families also telling me, this is the worst thing that I can probably say, Nadiah, but if I had a choice, I would rather have my rare disease child pass away before me, because I cannot imagine what the future would be if they were left to fend for themselves without family as caregiver. And that's a really powerful statement that we need to acknowledge, because it shows that in many countries that we belong to, the support system is not there, not strong enough to be able to care for individuals with complex medical needs once their caregivers are gone, without putting them in welfare homes, without putting them in support systems that are able to help them thrive. And there's also, sadly, data that shows that individuals who are persons with disability or with complex medical needs actually do have a higher risk of abuse post the death of their main caregivers, mainly because it might be intentional, but it might also be because they don't necessarily know how to deliver the care or the level of care that is required for the person with complex medical needs. More so if you are in a government charitable welfare home where it's sort of like a blanket, everybody gets a bed, it's more like equality, not equity, right? So it's important for us to also understand, how do we line up what help and care support that we might need later on in life. And this then, of course, adds to what we call secondary strain, because they're always at the back of our mind. We don't necessarily have the answers to it. Some people have actually moved countries just to kind of sort this out. But the reality is, there is no one silver bullet that solves this problem, and it continues to be a problem all across the world. Next. Then we talk about other challenges. For example, when we talk about care decisions, when is it the right time to look at other services? For example, the chairperson of Rare Disease International, some of you may know her, Durhain, is also a caregiver of a husband with medical needs, 2 children with complex medical needs, including one with rare disease. And, it was a big decision for her to realize, look, as much as I love my husband, I think maybe it's time for him to be in a care home. And she spoke about that when we last met. And as a caregiver, I know that there will be a time when I will age and I will have to make that decision of when is that right time for my daughter to receive additional support outside of what I am capable of giving. We've also seen parents who have tapped into the government services as parents in distress. So that allows them to tap into social services or people who will come in and check in on you, or your child being placed in residential placement in homes. Again, there's never an ideal situation, but I wanted to put this out because these are also some of the challenges that we often don't talk about, but are very real options that might be a future for some of us. And of course, there'll be other things like, how do we tap into resources, eligibility, community, respite care, etc., etc. Now, as a question, what are some of the services that are available in Australia for nationals to tap into? Maybe Danielle, thoughts?
I think everything you're listing is available here. I guess I can't speak on children's services in particular, or allied health services are available as adults, and I assume maybe again Susie might shed some light as well about children's services. But I guess with Medicare, it sort of reduces some of the financial burden, but not all services are covered. So you may have to sort of consider private care or get private insurance. These are also different thoughts that you have to think about as an individual, but also with like your in my case with my husband at the time, I had to weigh up all those sort of things about what's the best option, going through the public health system or the private health system. And I guess there's always medication management, that not everything is on the PBS, so there's costs involved that need to be factored in. So they sort of weigh on you the true cost of illness is really hard to sort of come to terms with at times. Yeah.
So for the average Australian, are most things covered by Medicare? Because that's actually paid via tax, right? No, it's not.
Yeah, it is taxpayer. It's a privilege to have it, yes, but I guess it also depends on your condition or services that are available to you. There's one of the things we probably have yet to talk about was a mental health plan when things get overwhelming. So, they're sort of subsidized costs for counselling, for psychology support services. But I guess again in the children living with rare disease, I'm not very familiar with. So I ask Susie respectfully if she has any ideas.
Susie, thoughts?
There's some things, primarily getting onto the NDIS, National Disability, was it insurance insurance scheme. And aside from that, there probably are a lot more resources out there, but unfortunately you're not really aware of them until you come across someone else that has it, that will say, hey, have you applied for this or have you got that? So there are definitely, like in terms of government funding and support, there's things like that as well. But even for the children with rare disease, I'm still learning about all the different things that might be out there, but there are also a lot of things that aren't covered. So it's a bit 50-50.
I'm sorry, I've
Okay.
just lost the slides because my screen is so sensitive, it flicks up something. So bear with me while
not to worry. So as she pulls up the slide, the last thing that I wanted to highlight in terms of caregiver mental health is that challenge around family challenges and advocacy. So we spoke about caregiving decisions, resources that are available, functional and cognitive impairment, secondary strains. We spoke about physical and emotional problems. We don't sometimes touch upon the fact that family challenges are real too, right? What are some of the things that we sometimes don't talk about enough? For example, the conflict on care. So we've had families saying, okay, the dad will take care of one and the mom will take care of the other. But what if you have a family of 7? Or what if you have a family that includes your in-laws living with you? Often there is a lack of support for caregivers. Yes, we acknowledge that there are behavioral issues, but sometimes it's also a situation of having to juggle, and this was very real during the pandemic. How do we juggle and assist those that were ill, not because of the rare disease, on top of having a person with rare disease? Because we had whole families being affected by COVID and us, struggling to keep our non-COVID but rare disease child isolated because they were not vaccinated yet, or they did not meet the criteria of being vaccinated. So there were many different things that we actually went through. So again, that's why we said hello, welcome to Alice in Wonderland, because nobody gave the map of how to handle that, right? We just had to figure it out, because the main aim here was keep the RD child well, because we don't know what would happen if they did have a respiratory illness, and most of the time it could be fatal. The other is, how do we ensure that the rest of the family gets well from COVID ASAP without us getting sick? Because we're stuck in the middle of like usually 2 or 3 different illnesses. And the biggest challenge is when we ourselves get sick. I remembered during COVID when I finally contracted COVID, it was because I was taking care of my mom. She had COVID and she didn't check early. So then I got COVID from her. But it was havoc because I have 4 children, and including my individual with rare disease. And I literally had to isolate myself in a room. But because the kids were still needing FaceTime with me, I had actually turned that interaction into like a daily kids show. I had a ukulele in one hand, we were having Zoom calls, and we were singing and doing all sorts of activities, but with mom on screen as though she was part of some TV program. And it was hilarious, but it worked for us. And I know that in the many families that we have, it's basically do whatever works, right? Whatever floats the boat is what we do. Do you want to click next, Daniel? So last is really about how do we advocate and how do we help each other rise? Because the other responsibility of being part of a rare disease community is, 1, how do we help ourselves? And number 2, find ways in which we can help each other. If we cannot help each other, let's not bring each other down. It's at the very least, let's try to kind of help each other keep steady, right? And that's part of the reason why I asked what was available in Australia, because when you coordinate through the systems, different countries would have different systems, different offerings for their nationals and non-nationals. And therefore, that would then determine how you would assess the system, whether it's private healthcare, whether it's Medicaid, whether it's travel to another country, whether it's using generic drugs, whether it's using allied health, whether it's using therapies. It really also depends on the maturity of the healthcare system of the countries that you're in. Okay, next. Zooming in, let's wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so. Why is caregiver mental health so crucial? And I think this does not need to be said, because there's so many different things that we are managing, and hence not managing our mental health and not having space for self-care. The risk of that is higher than us doing something and taking that time out. As much as I know this slide is preaching to the choir and telling everybody what they already know, very often we still don't do it. I know when I'm looking at this, I say, I'm still not doing this, even if I say it's important, and it's important for us to have caregiver mental health is so important. So for me, even this session, talking to all of you, is cathartic, because it's this safe space for us to kind of just acknowledge, yeah, I'm struggling. And just because I'm sharing the slides, it doesn't mean that I don't have lived experience with emotional ups and downs, or trying to be resilient, or trying to find my center, because at the end of the day, we're human, right? I mean, if we had it all made, even robots are now mimicking emotions, right? So even if you write to ChatGPT, it'll say, I'm sorry, I did not know that this answer was wrong. So ChatGPT can even be defensive now. So what more human beings, right? Naturally will say, ouch, that hurts. I'm not in a good space today, and I can't. So one of the things that I think is important is, as a caregiver or as an individual living with a rare condition, it's important to have days when we acknowledge, hey, I'm tapping out today because I need to tap out. But it doesn't mean that when we tap out, we're disengaged. It just means we need take 5 so that we can recenter, breathe deep, and then come back. For us in Indonesian, the word is keanjalan, the ability to bounce back. And the ability to bounce back, or the elasticity, or the ability to bounce back, very much also depends on the support system that's available, your understanding of the challenge that you're in, and your present mental state, right? If you're challenged, but you feel that there's no way out, it's very hard for you to bounce back, because you don't feel that there's anything to bounce back to. So that's why if you create this ecosystem of support, for me, I always tell parents, receiving a diagnosis of a loved one with rare disease, I can't promise you that your child will walk. I can't promise you that your child will talk. I can't promise you that your child will be a valedictorian, because a lot of parents will say, can my kid go to university? How long will my child live? But I always tell them that you will find a community that will understand you more than your own flesh and blood. You will be able to love like you've never loved before. Find courage and strength in things that you never, from a part of you that you never thought you had. You would learn to stop time and be grateful over the smallest things that nobody else sees as funny, or nobody else sees as special. And you're like, oh my God, you've said your first word at 10. You're fantastic. It's like the most amazing thing that has happened. And one of the things that I learned from a dear child with spinal muscular atrophy, his favorite line is, best day ever. And he says it like that, right? And I've learned so much from this little child, because his idea of a best day ever doesn't need to be the stars aligning. It can be, I went to the hawker stall and I got my favorite Chinese ketchup noodle. Best day ever. So that ability to be present in the moment and just say, hey, this is the best coffee ever. Even if, tomorrow's coffee is going to be better, that's fine. That's the best day ever tomorrow, right? But in that, being able to be present is acknowledging that I'm human, I exist right now, right here, and I have feelings, and I have weaknesses, but I also have strength, and I'm a beautiful soul, and this is what I am, and this is the best day ever, right? Best day ever doesn't mean everything works out. Best day ever means plus, minus, good and bad. Hey, it's the best day ever, and I'm here. And I think there's so much that we've been able to learn from young ones, because they're so raw. They don't necessarily have all the vocab. So they just say it as it is, or as they see it, right? Okay, next. I wanted to ask you, what would therefore be your caregiver style or self-care style. So I'm not telling you how to self-care because I know all of us have a different self-care style. So this is a very short quiz. It's only 7 questions, super easy to do. Pick your phone out, click on the QR code, and let's see what are some of our caregiver styles available. Wonders of technology allows us to do stuff. So let's take 3 minutes. I think you'll be able to do it in less than 5. Wow, everyone looks like this is a tougher quiz than the earlier one. Like, what do I do for self-care? None of the above.
Can you see the results as they come through? Sorry, Nadia, you were just muted.
Oh, sorry. No, I said the results are for you to see, and then we can share it. Yeah, because all of you will have different caregiver styles, so or self-care styles. Although I think talking to all of you, I probably already know what your self-care styles are.
We
Okay,
find out
Malavika,
all the different
what was
styles that you
yours?
have.
Oh yeah. So what was your style, Malavika? So actually what you can do is after this, you can try and rig it by answering different things and see what you get. This is also another useful tool that we can use. So what I found is people who've taken this once and realized that, oh, my self-care style is, I help others first or something like that, and realize, oh, how do I change that? Okay, let me try different answers and see if I get that. So what was yours, Malavika?
I got healthy on a budget, and
Okay.
it's kind of weird because that is really accurate. I think it's about
Healthy on a budget.
I focus on other people and spending more on others, that when it comes to my
Yes.
self-care, I kind of don't prioritize it as much, or don't spend enough time, money, or anything on it as much. So yeah, I do see where
A good aha, right?
Yeah.
All right. Any other ahas that you found? It's like you telling yourself, nah, this is it. You didn't want to tell this to yourself, so I'm telling this to you now. What about you, Susie? What did you find?
I got self-soothe with indulgence. The complete
Okay,
opposite.
What does that mean? What does self-soothe with indulgence mean?
I mean, I won't read out the actual blurb, but it's like if you actually if you hear the word indulgence, you might think, lavishing money and all that kind of stuff and having spas and all that.
Yeah.
But for me, it really is just having a nice hot bath with a nice hot drink and having a nice
correct.
beautiful moment to read a book.
Correct.
That's self-care.
Correct. Yeah. And that's not, so a lot of people assume that indulgent is a negative thing. Whereas really, if you decide, for example, your favorite thing is this lemon poppy seed cake on Randwick Cafe on a Saturday afternoon with your cup of tea because that's your idea of indulgence, then that's what it is, right? If your idea of an indulgence is turning on the radio up high and having nobody there and dancing like no one's watching, then that's your indulgence. It doesn't necessarily have to be that Birkin bag. So you will notice that for caregivers, our idea of indulgence is very different. So it's basically how to put yourself first and giving yourself that little say, okay, I deserve this, right? This is me time. And what about you, Danielle?
I'm working towards the indulgence, but my response ended up being healthy on a budget, like Malavika.
Okay.
But I also
Right.
think that's like, I guess, knowing myself and working towards, better self-awareness. That's me always going, oh, not yet. I don't deserve it yet. So there's a little bit of a
Yes.
sabotaging in terms of like, oh no, don't spend on yourself now. Like it's not worth it. And I hope to get to that indulgence space like Susie in terms of recognizing, enjoy those, gentle moments that you truly enjoy without guilt or,
Yes.
allowing your time for it. So,
Yes.
it's a work in progress.
Yeah, it's basically telling yourself that you're worth it, right? And it's okay to take that time to say, this is me time. And that's perfectly fine. Just because I have a me time doesn't mean I'm being selfish. It means that me needs to function so that me can love everybody else and care for everybody else. So it's a recalibrating time. So thank you. And I hope you'd be able to use that quiz on other people and see if other people get other answers or tweak yours as you find things change. What I found when I did the quiz was, I can't remember what my answer was, but it was again to do with prioritizing other people first. But I found that some of the answers would change a little bit in your cultural context. For example, it might not be a movie, it might be, I don't know, a concert for somebody else. Or it might not necessarily be talk to your friends, it might be to talk to your spouse, whatever. Because different people might have different support systems that are in place, but essentially you know that I know what the question is asking me, and that's kind of the answer that I would be inclined to. The other thing about all these quizzes is if you overthink it, means it's probably not true. So you gotta have to kind of like, okay, this is my first snap answer, I think this will be what I will do. That would kind of show you what your natural state of being is and what your inclination to do would be, rather than, because I've also found people who feel guilty. I know I should answer this, but I actually feel this. So maybe I should answer this one that I feel I should answer rather than I know what I would do, right? So that's why I thought these self quizzes are fun, because you don't have to show anyone your answer. You can even lie to me and I believe you, so that's fine. This is a safe space. I will accept whatever your answers are. Okay, so as we wrap up next, I wanted to share a little bit about, we've discussed this. Okay, next. So one of the things that we wanted to circle back is that not every cry for help is visible. And we've mentioned this several times today without really mentioning it. And I think if you don't remember anything else of what was shared today, I think it's to remember that sometimes the first person who will notice that something is not right might be the people that we're caregiving for, might be a stranger on a bus that has never met us before and looks at us and says, ma'am, are you all right? Might be that dentist who just wants to kind of extend a little bit of kindness and compassion and say, hey, let me help you if this is something that you're not able to do for now. Or it might be someone who you've just met at work. So the reality of it is, don't think that the only kind of help that you will find are in the spaces that you would most probably assume where help will come. And sometimes there is a situation when the help needs to start from ourselves. Because one of the biggest self-sabotagers is ourselves. The biggest naysayers of ourselves is ourselves. And until we can tackle the voice in our head that says, no, don't be selfish, think of other people first, we're never going to be able to get to that stage where we'll say, okay, I deserve this extra 5 minutes on the throne because I just want to scroll while I'm pooping. Or I just want to have that 5 minutes sleep while I hear the kids screaming. They're still safe. They're all right. Nothing's going to happen to them, right? But to get to that space, it does take time. It's not like tomorrow suddenly you say, yeah, okay, I'm okay with this. So I wanted to put it there that it is a process, and it's okay to take 3 steps back and 2 steps forward and 2 steps back again, because it is kind of like a tango, right? As we progress, we change as adults, we change as individuals, we change as caregivers, and our experience then shapes the decisions that we make in future and the kind of things that we will decide upon in future. So last 2 slides that I wanted to share is, one, it might be talking about vicarious trauma now, but the reality of it is we've been talking about vicarious trauma right from the beginning without talking about vicarious trauma. So what exactly is vicarious trauma? So I've decided that today's session is going to be a reverse engineering. I'll teach you everything about it without talking about it, and then we'll kind of recap, right? So vicarious trauma basically is secondary trauma. We've spoken about this earlier, right? In the fact that it is also known as compassion fatigue. Sometimes it is a situation that you go through yourself. Sometimes it is because of the psychological impact of this prolonged thing that you have been holding with you for the longest time. So you could be a caregiver, you could be a counselor, you could be a fireman, you could be an army officer, you could be in the front lines of COVID-19, you could be in mortal combat, you could be a doctor. Essentially seeing something that's negative and something that impacts you deeply for a prolonged period of time to the point where you now kind of take on that trauma as well. So you might not necessarily have a rare disease, but living with a person with rare disease helps bring their feelings and their challenges with you. And that's why we were talking about sometimes being more irritable, sometimes being angry, sometimes not being able to regulate, because some of these are symptoms of vicarious trauma. Sometimes you might be the adult living with rare disease. However, you're also a caregiver of someone else that has complex medical needs that does not have a rare disease. There is also vicarious trauma there in your anticipation, in your understanding of what people expect of you, in that feeling of guilt, in that feeling of, I shouldn't be putting myself first. So all that, instead of teaching you, this is what vicarious trauma means. There is resilience, there is negative, there is positive, because that's all sort of like the semantics of it, right? I think all of us have lived experience on what this means. I thought it would be best to talk about everything else and then say, hey guys, you've just spoken about it without talking about it. And really, we know that vicarious trauma leads to many different things, including emotional distress, including burnout, and including a decline in mental well-being, which all of us have seen, because it is impossible for a living human being to never feel sad, to never feel depressed, to never feel impacted by a negative situation in their lives. The difference is our ability to, as I mentioned earlier, bounce back. It's not just about withstanding. So a lot of people talk about sustainability and resilience. I don't believe that resilience is the end point, because resilience is like you're a tree and you get hit by storms. There will be a point where you will be uprooted, because a tree that is just constantly taking storms is like you're just trying to stand there and withstand. So there's this Chinese saying that says, be like water instead of a tree, right? So if you're water, if there's a rock there, if there's land there, if there's a drain there, you kind of flow following the shape of the situation, as opposed to the mindset is, I'm just going to have to withstand. I'm just going to withhold. I'm just going to take the hit, versus I'm going to be adaptable to the situation. I know I cannot control everything, so I will take the form and the shape of the vessel. If I need to be narrow, then I'll be narrow. If I need to be wide, then I will be wide. If I need to be the force of a tsunami, I will be that. If I need to be calm as the waves, then I will be that. The point is, the resilience comes with the ability to bounce back from that situation and say, okay, how do I see this problem? How do I internalize it? And how do I then manage the situation? So vicarious trauma actually also comes with 3 different things. Whether you are taking it negatively, which is everything that we've mentioned here, distress, burnout, mental ill health, etc. 2, neutral. Neutral means you're going through it and you can handle it. 50-50, most of the time, it doesn't impact you. Resilience is where we want to head, which means come what may, whatever that we impacted with, we always find a way to bounce back and be able to take on the challenges, accept, not give up, accept that some challenges we cannot change, and then find a way to work around it. So that's where we want to head, from negative to neutral to positive. So what are some of the things that we can do to cope? Last slide. So with that, and most of you already know this, one is we need to accept and recognize the signs. When we talk about recognizing the signs, we don't mean, oh, wow, okay, I'm going to head towards A, B, C, D, E. It also means recognize the signs before they become a red flag. So that's why I asked you guys to do the self-care quiz to say, hey, okay, if these are the things that make me happy, even if it's transient, like happy in a little bubble, do that, because that helps you from going into beep, 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 right? The point is to avoid red alert. When we talk about self-care, we also talk about setting boundaries of what works for us so that we're not a human punching bag. And this definitely, Danielle, is important in spaces where we belong to organizations where, as much as we are individuals struggling with a rare disease, we have employers or organizations that depend on us to deliver on some of the work that we require. I haven't even started talking about what does it mean to build an inclusive workplace for persons with disability or complex medical needs. I did a training on that for PwC Asia Pacific leaders. And it's amazing how even with big 4 companies, there's so many things that, you know, organizations haven't even thought about what it means to really have an inclusive workplace, right? Then ask for support. Now, the supervision part is sometimes we just need help. We don't know how to do a particular thing that actually helps better. For example, young families that have children with medical needs need to know how to use the medical tools like your cough assist machine or your BiPAP machine or your CPAP machine, or how to run the IV drip or how to do your infusion. There's so many things that we need to kind of do short of becoming a nurse ourselves. That's why it's important to seek supervision. Don't Google it. Go ask someone to teach you how to insert the thing properly to ensure that you're caregiving properly. And then have that check like, okay, my child is bigger now. Am I still doing it right? Is the titration correct? Should I be looking at a different way? Because as your child progress, as your adult progress, as you progress, of course, everything that you need to do for yourself also change. And then, of course, practice mindfulness. And I'll skip that because we've kind of done that from the beginning to the end. But that whole idea of practicing mindfulness is not about making it so formal, like, okay, it's 5 o'clock, I have to practice mindfulness. It's in every day that you do, in every little thing that you decide to partake in. What Malavika was talking about is putting yourself in the shoes of others, but also understanding that we have a discount, right? We don't necessarily understand everything that's going on with them. Therefore, we can actually ask. It's like, I honestly do not understand, or I don't know. Can you help me? The same way when you're going to say, can I help you? The other strong sentence is, help me understand. May I understand what it is that you're going through? Because chances are the person will be very happy to tell you what they're going through. It's just that nobody asked them. So they never said it, right? So instead of waiting for someone to, instead of finding that right person to have the space for you to open up, you can also be the person to say, hey, help me understand. How might I be able to help you better? And that's a big, big deal, even if it's as simple as, I'm sorry, this sounds like a very complicated medical condition and I never heard of it. And I think that's a very important thing that healthcare professionals very often do not do, because they assume that they will know. It's impossible to know 7,000 different rare conditions, right? So it's okay to say, I'm sorry, I've actually never heard of that. Can you tell me more about what it is? How does it feel? What are you going through right now? And I bet you the relationship that you create with the patient is far more powerful than, yeah, let me talk to you later next week and you furiously Googling what it actually means because you've never actually seen a patient like that, right? This also means maintaining a support system, which is what we're doing here. And I really hope that we'll be able to continue keeping in touch and being a part of each other's support system. And everything else from learning from each other and self-assessment, etc. But the last point that I wanted to highlight there was, remember, you have strengths, even in your moment of weaknesses. Even when we feel, oh my God, this is like over, I don't think I can take this anymore. There is a side of you that will never let yourself down. It's just a matter of finding, number one, that inner strength. 2, being able to say, hey, I need help. Can someone be with me right now? Because I don't trust myself being with myself. And being able to understand that it's okay to not be okay. And while it is human to feel guilty, I don't need to be guilty, because it's not like my responsibility to feel guilty all the time. It's okay to say that I will never feel guilty is never going to happen. There will be many things that I feel guilty about. That's human too. But to also accept the fact that, okay, I felt guilt about this, but I don't have to be, I don't have to feel guilty because there is an alternative, is a very important thing to remember. So with that, what I wanted to share is sometimes it feels that we're alone on this journey, but there are many other souls that are going through it with us. And sometimes when we say, come together in one voice, it's impossible when there's 7,000 diseases and everybody saying that their needs are important at the same time. All you hear is noise. But we can come in a harmony. Sometimes you will be forward and I will play back. Sometimes I'll play wing defense and somebody else will be forward. But the point is, if we find a way to find synergy, it's not about who's the loudest voice in the patient groups. It's about coming in harmony. That every single instrument has a space in this symphony, and we're coming together to create a whole tone, a whole harmony, a whole symphony, a whole tune of what that the society that we want can be. So back to what Brandon said at the beginning, I won't give up even when the sky seems rough, because I know we're worth it. So with that, I wanted to say thank you very much, and thank you for joining me this morning for our session. So you can get our numbers in the next slide. So before we end, I wanted to just circle back and get everybody to kind of breathe. So this is actually box breathing, and I'm pretty sure everybody knows what box breathing is. They teach Navy SEALs box breathing, especially when they're going to be doing rescues. But let's do box breathing together in several cycles. So feet on the ground, shoulders apart, hands either on your lap, or you can put one on your chest and one on your stomach, so you can feel your stomach expanding and not your chest going up and down, because it's supposed to be stomach breathing. So we're going to go breathe in, 4 counts, hold, 4 counts, breathe out, 4 counts, and hold 4 counts. Okay, ready, set, and go. Breathe in. Hold. Breathe out. And hold. Let's do that again. Breathe in. Your stomach expanding and not your chest. Breathe out. Hold. Breathe out. And hold. And last round. Breathe in all the possibilities and the positivity, and hold. And exhale. And hold. And done. Thank you, everyone.